what I'd like to do is, there's a number of outside people that have come in to share with you stories. And I was fired by a felon, but he's currently incarcerated. He's in for 7 years, fired for insider trading. Got 7 years and a $71 million fine. So I'll share with you that story. Usually I talk to business groups and I like to say, how many of you can say we're fired by a felon? And there's a few people that say yes. And I say, how many of you are fired by a felon currently incarcerated? And usually I'm the only guy. People say, do you ever talk to him? And I say, well, I don't know how to address him. Do I address it to the prison by name or by his inmate number? That's a joke. Here's the agenda. Background, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about just what my background is, because you'll see the perspective I have brought to the table. A little bit about the internet bubble. I want to give you a perspective of what caused, in his case, the felony conviction, but also two other stories that I was personally involved in that also led to, didn't work directly with these guys, but they all were in prison. In fact, two of them are still in prison as well. So a little bit about huge violation of ethics. Then about the grandma test, and I want to apply it back.
Al, I told you about the raffle tickets.
Where what?
The raffle tickets?
Yes, I got it.
Okay, good. Sorry, excuse me, everyone.
That's the reward, the iPod. I'm on 4 boards. Interesting, boards now given board of directors iPads rather than paper. So it's pretty cool. So anything we do, it's in the cloud, in the sky, and so you have access to it. So I suppose I've heard about universities. Do you do that yet? Do you guys get textbook? But some universities are flipping to giving you not 10 textbooks, but we'll give you 10,000 textbooks, right? Because it's all in the sky. Changing the economics of the textbook business. But I guess there's some iPad. Is this a be present to win? Is this like a game to get you to show up tomorrow afternoon? I think it is, right? So you could not be there in the morning and then just come in the afternoon. So we'll apply a little bit back to yourself, the grandma test, and then a little bit of what now, if we have time, to talk about a little bit of what has society done in response to the ethics, pretty bad ethics violations of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Make sense? I know what I'm about to say. I don't know what you're interested in. So if you don't participate, this doesn't work for me. That I'm real nervous talking about undergraduates. I usually talk to MBA types, and they usually call bullshit because they say, well, it doesn't work like that in my business life. I'm nervous that you won't do that because maybe you have a different business life. I will be disappointed if you don't participate. In fact, then you don't get raffle tickets. I guess that's why the raffle tickets are there, right? Okay, my background. Physics undergraduate, so numbers, science, all that stuff. Then was involved in operations, telecommunications, and media, so network design, engineering, staffing, setting up communication channels around the world. Then got into marketing, then got into product management, got into costing and pricing like that, went back and got an MBA after about 15 years. Went to undergraduate at Cal Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, California. Raised in LA, surfed before high school. Can't do that here. My wife says, I like Denver, but there's no ocean. But we like skiing. I taught skiing 20 years, taught snowboarding for a while, usually tele now. Then I did the MBA and got into finance. And that's what led me to, I guess, the last part of my career, which was moving up through finance, a controller, ultimately a chief financial officer for US West, $30 billion company. We merged with Quest, Joe Nacho, guy that's currently in prison. I got to screen this a little bit. I can't say bad things about Joe. I'm only going to say things that are in the public record. Joe, are you okay with that? And so then when I was fired, I got involved in board of director work. So that's kind of my career where I'm coming from. But in those last the late 1990s, I was involved in Internet Bubble 1. I said Bubble 1 because perhaps Bubble 2 is going on right now. Facebook, Living Social. What's the other big one that's going on right now? Oh, Groupon. All right, Groupon turned down $6 billion from Google. The rumor was they were going to go public at about $20 billion. They haven't quite gone public yet. But as you know, there are so many competitors to that. Is that a bubble? Will someone else pass them by? Well, I'm going to take you back to the first bubble when AOL was big. Who knows AOL anymore? When Yahoo was big. She just got fired, right? The CEO. When before Apple was big and when Google was just getting started. At that time, the bubble was caused by, I think, two phenomena. I'm going to give you this background because it sets up the stories. There were two things that caused the bubble to occur. One was the street, shareholders, the market, was rewarding ideas, not necessarily results. When I was your age, basically, stocks were traded based on their earnings and their cash. So it had to have a real return to the shareholders to reflect in the market price. Well, the internet bubble came along and people said, wow, this is the future. It will at some point in the future have earnings. But right now it has ideas or it has intellectual property. So at the time, if you could tell a good story, your company could be worth a lot. Blue Mountain Cards was one of the first web-based greeting card companies in the late 1990s. It sold for $600 million and it did not have $1 of revenue. Why would somebody pay $600 million for that?
They were long and they did the reputation.
Reputation and eyeballs. Enough people are using it, they'll find a way to convert that to revenues later. Just like Facebook. Like 5 years ago, Facebook, there was no revenue, but once they got you on Facebook, now there's all the revenue around it, either ads or connections or driving you to Facebook-related experiences. So the first thing that was in the room was this idea of a good story can drive significant wealth in terms of valuation. The second thing that came in the room at the same time was the idea of compensating executives through options. At one time, executives were compensated with salaries and maybe a bonus. If we have a good year, if we build a lot of cars, if we build buildings, if we make a lot of steel, if we fly a lot of airplanes, we will get a bonus. Along in the 1990s, people started saying, well, I like it better if the executive compensation is aligned with the shareholder return. If the shareholder stock goes up, let's have that related to the executive compensation go up. Makes sense. We're in this together. If the stock goes up, the executive would get more. So they put in place options. Options is the ability to buy a stock in the future at a low price. So if you have an option at $1 and the stock price goes up to $100, you can sell it at $100 and you only have to pay $1 for that piece of paper. Nice return. Al Gore was on the board of Google when it went out and he made, the rumor is, $20 to $30 million. Because Google stock went similar to Apple stock, what it did, right? So you had two things in the room that were pushing what became a bubble. One was the idea of a good story with or without good results. And the second was executives motivated maybe to tell a good story and get the stock price up. So it led to three stories. Here's the first one. First one is a company called Enron. Have you heard of Enron? In Houston, involved in energy, really a lot of different products. Ultimately, the people that went to jail there were for special entities, which is an off-balance sheet item. So they would borrow money, not show it on the balance sheet to their shareholders, so they looked more profitable than they really were. So that was lying or lack of disclosure. But that's not my story. So my story is my boss came up to me in 1998 and said, I was the chief financial officer and he was the chief executive officer. We had 50,000 employees. We had $10 billion in revenue at the time. Big company. And he said, I've heard that Enron has come up with a new product relevant to our industry. And it's a product where we would trade broadband futures. There have been a lot of people over the years that trade the futures of commodities. You can right now buy a bushel of wheat in 2016, and someone will give you a price for it. And whether or not there's a lot of water and rain and sun or not in 2015 will determine whether or not you made money or lose money. So you're betting on the future. Futures for oil, futures for copper, any commodity future. Well, these guys said, why don't we do futures of broadband? I know in 2 weeks, at 2 in the morning, between London and Dusseldorf, there will be a capacity of 6 gigabits Do you want to buy that from me for how much of a price? So the idea that you would sell a future capacity at an instant in time, very intriguing. So they got a lot of buzz on this, and Wall Street said, you know, we like that idea. We like people that think creative. We like people coming up with good ideas. We like people that are first movers. We will reward that. The stock started going up. My boss said to me, Al, why can't we do things like that? Why aren't we doing that? Go do a business case. You guys done business cases yet? Look at the market, look at competitors, look at prices, determine costs, do a projection, see if it makes sense to get in that business. So go do a case and come back. And so I went with my staff and tried to investigate. We came back and we said, it's hollow. First of all, we can't find it worked. What was your scrunchy nose? Who had a scrunchy nose? You had the best scrunchy nose. How would that work? It's an ephemeral thing. It's a capacity at some future point in time, and then the next minute, it's gone. There's nothing physical. How would you really do that? So we had trouble tracing it down. He said, Al, that's not the story I wanted. Let me show you the write-up they're getting from Merrill Lynch and from Solomon Brothers that shows they are being creative and creating this whole new business. We don't even know what it's about. You can't tell me that it's a hollow business. Go investigate. I went and investigated. Came back with the same answer. He didn't like that. I was lucky he didn't fire me at the time. 2 years later, during the Enron fiasco and the trials, the following story came out. Did anybody know the story? Jeffrey Skilling, the CEO, who's now incarcerating, Kenneth Lay ended up dying just before he went into prison. Jeffrey Skilling evidently had a meeting with somebody and said, we're working on this broadband thing. We've been working on it for 6 months. We need to show results to Wall Street. We have a couple analysts coming out to Houston, Texas, and we want to show them the results. So the analysts came out, as they were coming out, Skilling says to his staff, what are we going to show them? We haven't yet figured out how to do it. Scrunch nose. One of his staff says, I got an idea. On the 14th floor of this building, I don't know the details of this, by the way, I don't remember it, and for time I'm consolidating it. The 14th floor of this building is empty. There are some cubicles. Why don't we take some people, have them sit in the cubes with computers, with screens, put some pictures of the kids on the desk, and we'll walk the analysts through the back of the room and say, these guys, these people, men and women, are running our broadband, they're doing the training, and they're setting up the processes for our broadband business. Let's buy time. And so they did that. There was no business. The analysts wrote up how great it was that they were weeks away from launching this business. Hold that thought. We're going to talk about the ethics of that, from Skilling, who asked for it, from the manager who said the 14th floor is empty, and from the guy in the distribution office that was asked to come sit on the 14th floor. Don't ask questions, just sit for 2 hours, and you can play video games as long as your screen is turned to you. What are the ethics of those three people? And I almost got fired for it. Enron. So what they did, have you guys, you know a little bit about income statements? You have revenues less expense, and that's profit or income. So what they didn't do anything to revenues. It wasn't real. Didn't do anything to costs. Wasn't real. Didn't do anything to income, but it did something to perception. And therefore, their stock went up. So the executives were worth more, and the shareholders were happy temporarily. Second story, WorldCom. Bernie Ebbers, high school teacher and coach, somewhere in Arkansas, saw that there was the ability to buy, at the time, long-distance service from the old monopoly carrier, which was AT&T, and then turn it around and resell it, make 2 cents a transaction. And if you do enough of that, 2 cents adds up. So WorldCom started growing significantly. He became worth, in about an 8-year period, 8 to 10-year period, he became worth several $100 million. He still owns, I think, the largest lumber company in British Columbia, although because of the lawsuits, he's now selling it. He's in prison for, I think, 20 years or something, some long period of time. So he was growing significantly. So as you're growing significantly, the stock is rewarding that, just like Google is rewarded or Apple's rewarded. And the assumption of rewarding the stock after you grow is to assume what about the future? That it continues to grow, right? Somebody used to say to me, why don't you buy Microsoft stock? And I said, well, if you buy Microsoft stock, you're basically betting that Microsoft will be bigger than Brazil in 5 years. One advantage to learning to do spreadsheets, as you're all learning, is you'll be able to do those calculations yourself. Do the calculation of what you're assuming about the next Apple product in order to buy it at today's price. It certainly has done wonders. I got the Apple thing, right? I paid the 30% Steve Jobs, he's dead, Steve Jobs premium. But the fact is, how many more of these can they come out? They've done really good. We'll see if it continues. Anyway, so he was on this growth curve, and the shares were priced, assuming it continued. Well, it started to tip down a little bit. The shareholder said, well, are you weakening? Are you no longer growing? Should we leave your stock? He said, no, we're doing fine. Next quarter's results will be just as good as the last. He met with a CFO, Scott, can't remember his name, he was in prison for a while too. Met with his CFO, and he said, you know, we need to continue to show good results. And his CFO said, well, we've got revenues we have additional sales next year of 100 million, and we have expenses against those of 40 million. So if we report, as we always have, 140, we'll show 60 as profit. But last quarter, it was 70. Again, I'm making these numbers up for illustrative purposes. But you can investigate it, and the theory is right. But you know what we can do is that 40 is the cost of selling the 100. Marketing and sales cost. And you know, I think because we're selling to customers that we're going to have a long relationship with, what we should do is we should take those costs of sales and not just apply it against this 100, but we should apply it against future hundreds because of the relationship we have with these customers. So we should capitalize. You guys taken accounting yet? We should capitalize. Capitalize means takes that cost and spread it over the life of its use. And he said, because I'm in a relationship with these customers for 4 years, let's spread the cost over 4. So let's take the 40 and spread it over 4. So in the current period, the 40 becomes 10. And the results to the street becomes 90. And the stock stays up. My connection to it is I have a good friend that worked for me and went to become a CFO of a subsidiary of AT&T. And he tells a story about being in an AT&T boardroom. And the director saying, why aren't our expenses to revenue, why isn't our efficiency as good as WorldCom? Why does it cost us more to deliver 100 million of revenue than WorldCom? Why are we spending 40 to deliver 100? That's how different are they really? Where WorldCom seems to be spending 10 against 100. 3 people got fired in 2 years because they were perceived to not be as efficient, as effective as WorldCom in delivering products at a low cost. Fired. 2 years later, it came out that, of course, what happened is WorldCom was lying. One of the guys who got fired was the CEO of AT&T for a number of reasons, but this was kind of one. He is currently on a roadshow, I heard, where if you had him come in here and talk, he would get up and show you these numbers restated, basically defending his reputation. Because everybody says you were fired because you weren't effective. And he says, wait a minute, I wasn't effective because I was being compared to a lie. So hold that thought from an ethic viewpoint. Bernie Ebbers, the guy that said we need a way to show the numbers are better. Scott, his CFO, who said, I think I got an idea. It's in a gray area of accounting. Let's try it. and then the accounting person that typed it into the machine. Who violated what ethics, and what would you do? We'll come back to that. Last issue, or last story, is Quest. Hey, that's kind of cool. That's like Freudian, different color. This is me. So Quest in this period of the internet bubble, Phil Anschutz. Who's heard of Phil Anschutz? Richest person in Colorado, $15 billion at one time. Phil Anschutz, I'll tell you a cute little story, 2 stories. One story is, so Phil Anschutz's dad was into oil. So, okay, I'll get into oil. So he was getting into oil. And they were digging a wildcat well somewhere in Oklahoma. This was in the early 60s, I think. Phil's older than I am, in the early 60s. And wells, when you're digging them, suddenly you've seen those gushers come out. No Country for Old Men, with that movie, whatever, you see those gushers come out, that would happen. And then sometimes it would catch on fire. And pretty horrific fire. There's one guy called Red Adair who would go around the world, and for lots of money, he would put out your oil fires. Well, Phil was driving along somewhere, stopped for the night. He gets a call from his field guy, and the guy says, you know, we got this oil, we got a big gusher, but we got a fire. And we won't be able to put the fire out for 2 to 3 weeks. Phil hangs up and says, what am I going to do? My oil is burning. What am I going to do about the lost revenue I'm getting, as well as now we'd probably worry about the environmental problem with it. So then Phil was reading a newspaper or something, and he read about Hollywood. I'm from LA. He read about Hollywood making a movie about Red Adair with John Wayne at the time. And he came up with an idea. And he called up the producer the next day. And he said, are you making a movie about Red Adair? And they said, yeah. He said, you know, Red Adair, he puts out oil fires. Hollywood guy says, yeah. And he says, how are you going to film that? And he said, I don't know. We're going to make a little small fire, make it look big. And Phil goes, I got a big fire. And the Hollywood guy goes, you do? He goes, yeah, in Oklahoma. He says, well, you know, could I use it? And Phil says, well, you know, it's going to be put out tomorrow. But if you'd like, I'll let it burn for 2 weeks. And I'll only charge you X per day. Is that brilliant? Is that brilliant? Okay, second story, just as brilliant. He is a smart guy, except he hired Joe Nacho. Second, do you edit all this or just some of it? The second thing he did was very brilliant, is he noticed that railroads in America, they were big in the 1800s, big in the early 1900s. In the mid-1900s, trucks came along, and you see these big shipping containers on trucks. Became big in 1970 or whatever. So railroad stock drops. And he says, well, first of all, I think railroads will always be necessary to move lots of things like coal, like corn, like whatever. Well, now with container shipping. But he also did some due diligence. Railroads own what land in every city in America? Where is the land that a railroad owns in every city? What's it called in Denver? Lodo. So if I buy the railroad, I get a big part of Lodo in every city. In this case, it was a Union Pacific, whatever, so it wasn't every city, but a lot of big cities. So it was a great way to get relatively cheap land. I mean, it's kind of crummy land, right? It's got railroads on it. But what does it become when you put in Coors Field? What does it become when you put in the Staples Center in LA? It becomes really nice. So his idea was, I'm going to buy the railroad. One thing I'm really getting is real estate. Then he bought it, and he found out that railroads, this would have been in the mid-1990s, had rights-of-way along the rail line. And people had dug up the rights-of-way and put in fiber optic cables. He goes, whoa. And this is when, of course, the internet was just exploding, and what do you need is broadband capacity, right? So he found himself sitting on top of broadband fiber optic pipes across the western half of the US. He said, I'm going to spin that off of the railroad, and I'm going to call that Quest, Ride the Light. And I'm going to hire Nacho, and we'll start filling it up with products and services, largely business to business, big big capacity users. He also came up with the idea of why don't we digitize movies? You know, we still use physical tape in a movie theater, most of them. He says, well, why don't we put in place a digital projector? Mid-1990s, when those weren't really around. And then what we'll do is we'll use the fiber optic pipes to connect to Hollywood, or wherever the server is, and we'll do that to the movie theaters. Pretty brilliant guy. Anyway, so Joe Nacho started filling it up. Quest was growing 30, 50, 100% per quarter. Significant growth. Quest became so big, they became as big as US West. Perhaps they saw that the growth may not continue forever. They wanted to merge with a more traditional company that had cash and a balance sheet. They bought US West. There were 13 executives. 8 of us were shot the first night. 3 were shot the next 3 months, and 2 lasted 2 years. But you know, that happens, right? In mergers, you get shot. Red coat, blue coat, red coat, sorry, you're dead. So I was shot. So I never really worked for him. So fired by a felon's cute. Legally, it's not true. Legally, it's not true. Joe, I love you, buddy. I do some of these where they broadcast Afghanistan, whatever, where people do remote MBAs now for CSU, CU, and so I have to explain to them who Joe is. But anyway. So Quest, after they bought US West, wanted to continue the significant revenue. So they came up with an idea where Quest had these fiber optic capacity, and they found a company, in fact, WorldCom, by the way, was one of them, in the eastern US that had fiber optic capacity. So you had fiber optic capacity, I have capacity. I want to sell to a customer a line from LA to New York. I'm going to take it to Chicago, then you pick it up from Chicago to New York. So I want to swap with you our capacity, so when I go make the offer to the customer, it's administratively all done. I know the price, I know the capacity, so now I know what I'm selling. So he went to this person and said, well, rather than selling it to you, why don't we just swap capacity? Why don't you give me the equivalent of $100 million of annual capacity, which is so many gigabits per day per whatever, and I'll give you 100 million. So we'll just swap capacity, barter. Then they went to their income statement, and Quest is traded on what, do you think?
NASDAQ.
Sorry?
NASDAQ. The NASDAQ.
Right, but the value of the stock is reflective of what characteristic of the Quest stock back then? Growth. Right, so it's this go-go internet thing. By the way, I got to start giving out some of these. So sharpen your questions, or I'll get them. Then I have to come back tomorrow. Is that right? I don't want to come back. Okay, so he said, I just sold 100 million of capacity to the Eastern Optic Company, and I just bought 100 million of capacity. And so my earnings, if my earnings the previous quarter were 1 billion, it's now 1.1 billion. So does that look like I grew? Did I really grow? There's a concept called disclosure that's now real big in stock trading, and that's that you need to disclose the implications of what you're saying. What Joe ultimately went to jail for was he was selling stock into a market that was assuming the revenue was growing because all it saw was the 100 million. If he had said to the market, oh, by the way, the 100 million in revenue is offset by 100 in expense, and it's just a swap that we're trading, the market might have interpreted that as a different way.
So he told them that he was just selling it, but he wasn't telling the others that they were trading it?
I think, the lawyer, would you like to object now at this time, the legal counsel? I think the lawyer would say what I said was a little too simplistic. I think, in fairness, what he did was didn't explain it. He probably didn't lie. I don't think he was convicted of lying. What he was convicted of was insider trading. He traded, well, the fine was $71 million. 52 of that was, 19 of it was a fine, and 52 million was ill-gotten gains. The 52 million was the benefit he had of selling his options. The court ruled, and evidently the jurors ruled, that the stock would not have been trading at the level it was if the marketplace understood the dynamics of the business.
Is that the marketplace's fault?
It's the marketplace's fault if it's disclosed, is what the jury
So
decided.
he wasn't disclosing his expenditures, but the profit still would have been the same.
Right. That's what he would have argued, right? He would have argued,
That was changing.
look at the numbers. The numbers, I did not lie on the numbers. The jury evidently felt that the numbers were misleading. And there's been now a requirement that MD&A, management discussion and analysis, be significantly improved in financial reports. Because financial reports, you've seen annual reports, how thick they are, the number of footnotes, how difficult they are to read. The jury evidently agreed with the prosecution that said it is management's responsibility to clarify anything that may be misleading. And I wasn't the jury, but in this case he was found guilty and he's serving for it. If it wasn't taped, I'd say one more story, but I won't tell you that story until the tape's out. So he was found guilty of insider trading as a result of not letting people know that the business was slowing its growth, but the growth was, some would say, allegedly. Hey, I'll throw that word in. Allegedly. You like that word? Allegedly, it was allegedly, it looked like it was still growing. That's what it came down to. White-collar crimes are very hard to convict because of the very discussion we're having, right? You can see a case where, well, the shareholders beware, right? You bought Quest, what'd you think? You know, you should have sold when other people were selling. You knew Joe was selling some, you should have sold. So there certainly his defense, by the way, his defense cost what I read in the Denver Post was, I think it was $30 to $40 million. 6 years it took to try him.
It just seems like very basic math to have people in the marketplace not understand.
Well, the reason is his stock is not traded on this number. It's traded on this number. It's the 5-minute rule, I used to say it. I used to talk a lot to Wall Street. And most analysts gave me 5 minutes.
So you just got time to say it.
And so in that 5 minutes, if I just talked about the top line, half of them are going to walk away thinking about the top line. Because they may not have the time or the, well, they certainly have the ability, but a lot of them just don't have the time to do the digging in thing that you're about to do in the next couple of years in business cases. Look at how many shares are traded per day. That's a lot less than 5 minutes. A lot of shares are now program traded. They're based on no data, just on momentum, just based on rumor. What happened with Apple? 20% drop when Jobs died, right? Was that based on any analysis? No, so there's a lot of that.
I was just saying that, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you one. You're so good. See how you get one of these, by the way? I get to use the iPad if you win it. And by the way, I'm giving you both pieces, I was instructed to say, so you are responsible to deposit wherever you deposit it. And I should give you one just for scrunching, because I knew you were about to ask a good question. If you don't ask a good question, I'm going to take it back. Okay, so those are the 3 stories. So here's the kind of the grandma test and the ethics test. So let's think of the 3 kind of people and types of individuals as long. So the executive level, the manager level, hey, the 14th floor is empty, and the worker level. Come sit at this desk for 2 hours. Make this entry. Don't ask questions. Do what you're told. So let's first go to Enron. So on a scale of 0 to 4, 4 is highly guilty, 0 is not guilty of ethics violation. Let's first go with the executives for Enron. So why 4?
Because they knew what they were doing. Misleading and
They would say, I didn't do anything, I didn't cook the books. They would say, I didn't do anything that anybody else doesn't do.
That's not an excuse.
I mean, Hollywood sends out a little clip of a movie, gets you all excited about it. It's not the whole movie. Movie might not be as good as they say. Apple leaks that the Apple 5 is going to come out and have all these good things, and a big disappointment, right? Stock went down on that. I would have lost money if I bought based on what I thought what Apple 5 was going to do. Still give them a 4? They all went to jail. So you're right, they all got a 4. And I would agree. And they're all currently in jail. What about the manager? Managers also get paid in options, not as much. But the difference between a nicer car and a regular car might be based on the options. The ability to move out of the house. What they say? You guys are going to live in your home and with your parents till you're 28. Did you just come from that guy? Man, he was good, wasn't he? Talk about energy. Kind of went after you guys. I went after the ladies too. Pretty honest, or at least candid. So the managers are a little bit incented financially. They got a mortgage, a kid, and a dog, so they don't want to get fired. And they might really like this person they're talking to, because this person, in all 3 cases, they're talking to a charismatic person, not that dissimilar to the guy talking today in the meeting. These are very articulate, fill a room kind of people. Because that's what the bubble was about. They fill the room. They're exciting, fun, smart people. Now, there's a movie about Enron scandals called The Smartest People in the Room. Cut on it. What would you give these guys? Enron.
Depending on the knowledge that they had about it, you can't really tell in between all the managers who knew what, but if they had a part of the decision, that's it.
I think that their position is different because you said that they're trying more to buy time instead of just to completely pull, the bad roast from these eyes,
I think they probably would say, right? We're actually working on it.
Right.
We just haven't delivered it yet, and so we just want to show that we're working on it. All we did was say those people are working on it. If they were led to believe they were well down the road, that's their problem. Yes, sir.
Did every single worker in Enron know what they were what the executives were doing, or a few people blindsided by it?
I don't know. Okay. We're free to. Let's talk about the one person that would have known, right? The one person that went and fixed up the 14th floor. Let's talk about that person.
Well, in this case of that one person, then I would say 3, just because he's guilty enough to come up with it was obviously a bad idea, it was misleading, it was wrong, but it was an idea, and the executives are the ones that put it into motion.
Yeah, if you're going to go, because as you said, there's different levels of managers and stuff. I mean, there are some managers, the ones who are trading energy in California, I give it a 4. Then there are others who I'm sure were just, the lower level managers who are just in charge of the workers. I give them maybe a 0.
It's interesting how the Department of Justice goes after the middle managers to get to the top. Top managers are usually smart enough to not leave tracks if they're doing something that's questionable. So they'll go after the middle manager. There are several Quest people that ultimately had to either pay fines or agree to not serve as a director or an officer of a public company. And they went after that person to get information on that person. It's not fun to watch. What do you think that person would say if they were here, this person here? If they're in the room, they'd say, but I was ordered to do it? What else would they say? No harm, somebody
I
said?
didn't know what was gonna happen.
I didn't know. All right, so they'd say ordered. They'd say no harm. They'd say temporary. Okay, so but ultimately, where were we? 2 to 3? Okay, what about the worker?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What would be the repercussions of the worker who enters that false statement, the individual? Like, would they get jail time as well?
We'll get down there.
All
Right. Well, yeah, we'll get there are accountants entering both of these two examples required someone typing in the machine. They're right here. And the lady that blew the whistle on this was a lead auditor that was kind of at this level. Anyway, so now go to the worker level. You're not doing anything. Come in at 10 in the morning and sit down here and pretend you're working. This is Enron. They put in a false broadband trading desk.
I'd say one if you're a worker that's not involved with that false thing on the 14th floor, because the top executives aren't going to come and fill you in on the scam that they're trying to pull off. So, I mean, you're just kind of working towards the goal that's presented to you, but you don't know that goal is kind of leading the company in the wrong direction, I guess.
And that translates to a number of.
I'd say one if you don't know about it. I mean, one if you're.
I say one, but also just because one or two, because they should have the knowledge enough to realize that something fishy is going on if they ask you to just go sit at a desk and pretend like you're working. So I feel like they have the responsibility to ask the questions, but at the same time, if they're not given the resources to find the answers to those questions, they're kind of not as responsible.
I've done a lot of depositions in my career, and with a camera on. A deposition is like testimony, but without the judge and jury there. It's a deposition in anticipation of a trial. The hardest question, I always say, the hardest question is, Mr. Spies, isn't it true that you either knew or you should have known? Wow. So these people either knew or they should have known that they were playing a game. Who else had a comment here? So what number did we give them?
I'd say 1 because it's not like them just sitting there. It's not the same as like them changing the books and they're totally aware that they're changing the books.
So maybe they didn't know, or they're ordered, or they're wimpy. When I studied ethics, kind of, a long time ago, we used to talk about, the classic one was a Nazi soldier. Ich bin ein deutsches Mann, auf Deutschland, nicht wahr? Sprichst du Deutsch? No? Ein bisschen. So the defense of a Nazi soldier is what? I was following orders. I was following orders. And what just happened to that guy, 87 years old, Indiana? He was finally, after what, 20 years, wasn't it? They finally sent him to Germany to stand trial, or Ukraine or something. And now it's opened up the ability to, not export, whatever it is, when you... Deep, there's some other word, when it's a legal thing. Yeah, anyway. And he says, yeah, I was there. I was just keeping order. And they said, but 12,000 people died at that camp. And we want blood. So just following orders didn't get him off. You either knew or you should have known.
I feel though if it wasn't a military trial, just following orders might have stood up. Well, because if it was another military judging that particular man, that most militaries have the follow order type rules in them, and so they would be more of an understandable case. But in a civil court, you have people who would just get angry with all the emotion behind it.
Very complicated, sure. My son's in the military, lieutenant commander in the Navy, and he talks about how in their ethical training, they are, while they're taught to follow orders and turn left and turn right and all that, they're also taught that you have responsibility to not do something that crosses a line for you, which is fascinating how you'd manage a military like that, but they've tried to implement it partly in response to the Nuremberg trials and other things, so that if your commander was doing something inappropriate, you wouldn't be part of implementing atrocities or whatever. You can all judge over the next 60 years whether or not you think that's working. So let's go here. WorldCom. Bernie Ebbers also liked boats. He had the largest yacht company in Vancouver, British Columbia. No longer has it. So what number would you give the WorldCom executives? They were the ones that spread the forth. Pretty easy one on him, right? And they both went to prison as well. How about the manager? So Scott, the CFO, says, you know, we have always reflected, when we made a sale, we reflected the cost of the sale. But I've been thinking that this customer, we're going to have a relationship for 5 years. So why don't we spread that cost over the 5 years? I think that's a legitimate accounting approach. When it finally came out what had happened, the board called up the CFO and said, we want an explanation tomorrow morning on what you've done and why. And what he wrote up was an accounting interpretation of why it's appropriate. It had never been done before, it had never been done since. It is not allowed by the SEC, but he wrote up, bring tears to your eyes, at least a reasoning as to why it was appropriate, and so he would have gone to this level and said, I'm the CFO, here is my reasoning, type that number in, or tell the worker to type that number in. So what's the ethical violation of the middle person?
He believed his own lie, in a sense. By believing his own lie, he created an issue with everything. So if I don't really know how much guilt the managers have if they're being fed something that someone legitimately believes is legal.
How many minutes do we have, by the way? We're done?
You're done.
Doesn't matter. Okay. So generally the way this works when I've done this before is it kind of comes out the same way. The reason is because these people either knew or should have known. These people had a lot of pressure, maybe didn't have all the facts. The wrap I wanted to do on this is just to ask you to spend a minute to ask yourself what you do in similar situations. And here are the ethics questions I give when I give these talks. One is, because some people I say, well, if you're sitting next to this person and you see it's happening, do you have a responsibility to report that person? Most people eventually raise their hand and say, if the company's going to go under, I have a responsibility. And then I say, if you're in your dorm room and your roommate is downloading illegal software, do you have a responsibility to report that person? Or we get into the ethics of dumping hazardous chemicals. And then I say, and when was the last time we as individuals took electronics, which is really bad stuff, and threw it in the trash can as opposed to recycled it? My point is, hopefully as you go through the ethics of the next couple days, not just putting yourself in the place of the stories you hear, but each and every day in your life you have choices yourself. The last thing I'd leave with you is the grandma test. The grandma test is, whatever you do, could you explain it to your grandmother? And would you be happy doing it? That's the test of ethics. And I still have some more of these. Who was thinking of asking a question? You guys, you asked a question, you asked a question, and you asked one.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.